If you see me looking to my side here, it's because I'm looking at the other screen. Okay, we're all live on YouTube, and I guess over time we'll have people come to join us there. We've got one joined in straight away. I'll do an introduction as I always do to the meetings, and then I will introduce our speaker tonight. So, got my camera counting up that. Okay, a very big welcome to Denby Dale Amateur Radio Club this evening, and to friends of the club that are here tonight, as well as our members and regular visitors to Denby Dale, and a big welcome to people who found us on YouTube and are watching us live tonight, and will be picking up this episode of our regular online talks later in the week or the month. Just so people know here, just to give an idea of the scale here, we've now got something like 850 subscribers to our YouTube channel who get messages that we post there about our videos. We've got 50 brave souls on average each week who listen during the week to the recording of our digital net on a Thursday night. So we have more listeners during the week from YouTube to the digital net than we have participate in the net on a Thursday night. So as they say nowadays, it's a strange old world, but we're just taking advantage of it and having fun with it and getting amateur radio out there into as many different places as we can do. So I'd like to give a very big welcome to our speaker tonight, David. His call sign is G4JSZ. And say I got alerted to David's book that he's written, and I'm sure you'll tell us more about that, David, about Gerald Marqueu's G2NM by an article that appeared in Radcon with a review of the book. And I thought, what a fantastic story that is, that David's written here about this guy, you know, active in the 1920s in radio and amateur radio. It just sounded like whoever wrote that review did a very great job, because it immediately piqued my interest to the extent I did two things. One is I ordered myself my own copy of the book. So I've got my own copy of the book, and I've read it and enjoyed it considerably. And it also prompted me to track down David and his email and drop him a note and say, would you come and tell the story to our radio club, and we'll help publicize it more widely in the amateur radio community, which we will do both on our YouTube channel and by messages we'll post out on social media. So thank you very much, David, for taking up our invitation. David is like many of us in this room, by the way, because he got into the hobby as a young boy, really. So I think probably about the same age, David, as I was. I was about 12 years old when I first discovered, 11, 12 years old when I first discovered amateur radio. And I know there's a number of people in this room and a number of our club members who'll be watching this because they can't come to the meeting tonight because they're doing other things, who are very similar to that. In my case, it was through my dad, who had never got an amateur radio license, but had been building valve radios during the Second World War. Probably wasn't supposed to, but did. Absolutely loved tinkering with electronics, ended up working on production of radar valves, and then ended up in research on computers after in his slightly older years. And he got me interested when I fiddled with a radio, a battery powered transistor radio, as they were called in the 1960s, that I was given for my birthday. And I retuned it, and I could hear these guys talking on 160 meters AM, and it just piqued my interest. And I think we're probably, and a number of us are like that in this room, of that generation, who radio was so amazing, because, you know, what we had, if we were lucky at home, was to have a telephone, but we couldn't make many calls on it because it was very expensive. We certainly didn't speak to people in other countries. And, you know, we didn't really listen to radio from other countries either as well. So the concept of amateur radio and the people playing with things in their houses and being able to talk on these weird bits of equipment they had with valves in them and bits of wire and communicate with people worldwide. That's the hobby that we all enjoy nowadays. That's what piqued my interest, and I think from David's little biography of himself, David's was very similar when he was at school. David, I know, tells me that he went on after he got his O levels to a job at the BBC engineering department and worked on one of the shortwave transmitting stations in Cumberland in 1970, then got posted to one that we've probably all passed at some stage, the Droitwich transmitting station, which you could never miss, could you, when you were driving from north to south or south to north in the middle of England there. And then David then moved to the West Midlands, went into teaching in a high school, set up a radio club there. So that's something that is pretty good, and is still in touch with some of his pupils that you taught, David. So that's pretty good that you're still in touch with them, and that's absolutely wonderful. And took his license G4J, I said, in 1970, his full license. So that's all I'm going to give you about your background there, David. You can give us the rest. I know you've written two books. You wrote this book, which people won't see properly because I'm holding it up with the background screen on it. But this is the front cover of the book that David wrote on G2NM, G2NM, Gerald Marquez, pioneer of radio. And I know the other book was also a book based on the diary of Gerald Marquez, who spent a year in Germany as well. So you can tell us about both those things, David. So I'm not going to speak any longer. I'm going to hand the microphone over to you, David, and let you take it from there.
Thank you very much, Nick, and many thanks for inviting me, and a very good evening to everyone. I'm hoping you can all hear me. Is that okay?
5 and 9, loud and clear.
Great, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to see you all. It's interesting to see that you extend from South Africa to the United States, which is quite a broad spectrum. First thing I'm going to say is why write a biography about this man? Well, in the late 1960s, I met his son, David Marquez, who asked me if I'd ever heard of his father. I said no. Well, I'd spent the last 4 years in Canada, so I could be excused, I suppose. But I thought, after what he told me, that this man, Jerry, we'll call him G2NM, needed recognition for all his achievements. He was, and he is, important. My book's entitled Gerald Ergen Marquez, G2NM, Pioneer of Radio, and it's about 300 pages long and contains a large amount of research based on the archives held at the Amberley Museum in West Sussex. I had a huge amount of help from David, his son. Nick would have the black and white version from Amazon. I hold the total rights of the color version, which is a lot nicer. And the color version is the same price. It's £20, including post and packing. It's not a technical book. It's about a man's life, but includes an input about all his experiments and everything he was involved in. So why is he important? He first of all, he pioneered the use of shortwaves. He started broadcasting entertainment to the British Empire from his home. He was a founder member of the International Amateur Radio Association. He was the first person to make a radio contact between Britain and California, between Britain and New Zealand, and between Britain and South America. He was acknowledged by the police and ambulance services for all his guidance in setting up mobile communications. I've got quite a few pictures to show you that I'm going to leave up most of the time. But can I please make the point of saying the copyright is very strict. All the graphic illustrations I show are subject to copyright. I spent nearly 12 years securing them. And I'd like to start by thanking the Amberley Museum which is the Museum of Engineering in West Sussex, for all the wonderful support they've had. They've been incredibly helpful. I've spent several days there researching in appalling conditions. They've been very kind, and I couldn't have done it without them. I'm going to just share this picture of you of the Amberley Museum. I'm hoping this is coming up all right.
Yeah, absolutely fine, David.
Great. This is actually the library. Is it zooming up all right? Or not?
Yeah, it's zooming absolutely perfectly.
Right. So that's the library door, and I spent my time in there. The museum is behind this windmill, and it's representing engineering of every sort. And there is a wonderful exhibition of radio equipment there that goes back a long, long way. Right. So I won't go into his life history, but it needs to be mentioned that his father was a German national. So he taught his son, Jerry, German. So Jerry was fluent in German. His father settled in England and developed a business as a grain dealer on the Corn Exchange, which was quite an important position then. When Jerry was 16, his father sent him to engineering school in Einbeck, which is Lower Saxony, so about 100 miles south of Hanover, sort of south central Germany. It's a beautiful medieval town, well worth a visit. So he spent 1 year studying there, and his father made him keep a diary. And that's what my first book was based on, all the exploits that he was involved in, all the things he learned. He was no angel. He seemed to develop a pretty good appetite for beer and girls. And one day he went out on his bike to a nearby town, and I remember he's 16 years old and bought a shotgun, broke it into 3 pieces, stock, barrel, and firing mechanism, wrapped it round with his raincoat, cycled back to his lodgings so the landlord wouldn't see him, go in with it. But the engineering school, is that clear? Does that come up?
Yes, it has. Absolutely fine.
Good. Thank you. Before it was used as an engineering school, it was used by the Saxon army for training. And then after it closed as an engineering school in about 1904, it became a bicycle factory. And that building is still there today. If you take a careful note of the center and left-hand side, that's what you'd see today. It's the Noza Rathaus, which is the town hall. Magnificent building. And this is where Jerry lived, which was number 5 Bürgermeisterwelle, just near the center of Einbeck. So he would finish at his school, probably hop over this wall and go through the back door. Well, after 1 year in Germany, he returned to England, and then he attended Crystal Palace School of Practical Engineering, passed out in 1907. He then went to Lincolnshire, Grantham, and joined a company called Ruston's as a steam pump trainee engineer. And he completed that. And one of his first jobs was in 1909, when he was given the task of taking a steam pump to modern day Turkey. So the map is here. He would have left somewhere on the coast of England with this steam pump on board a steamer, sailed all the way through the Med to Alexandria, and then on a horse and cart, literally with no springs, he traveled all the way up through Egypt, Gaza, Israel, Syria, right up through to install this steam pump. On the way, he was a witness to what has been called the Adana massacre, when tens of thousands of Armenian Christians were killed by the Ottomans. And during the time he was experiencing this, he sent several messages to his father and to his boss, asking, what on earth shall I do? And his boss said, carry on, which he did and finished the job, albeit late. His next job was to go to Mexico and install another steam pump. And when he arrived, he found himself in the middle of the Mexican Revolution, which wasn't the best situation, but he did it. He started experimenting with radio in the 1910s. He was married in 1913, and he and his wife went to live near Bristol. And then, of course, this is approaching the First World War, and in July 1915, the Postmaster General announced that all private wireless equipment would be taken into post office custody. So all the amateurs were given receipts, and that meant all amateur experimentation ceased altogether during the duration of the war. He was not called up because he was in a reserved occupation. Engineers of any sort were highly valued in that specialty. He was licensed in 1919 as 2NM and is listed in the very first call sign book, which is hopefully in front of your screen.
It is.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback. You'll notice that I date stamped some of the photographs. That's the 22nd of January 2013. Working in that library in Amberley was bitterly cold. I had a rug over my head, fingerless mitts, and I was typing and taking photographs, and my hands were blue at the end of it. I mean, don't get the violins out, but it was really just bitterly cold. So this call sign book, called a wireless directory, just had 4 pages of entries. If I zoom in, you'll see Jerry, 2NM, G Marquews, Coombe Dingle, Queen's Park, Caterham, using spark apparatus, permitted to use 10 watts. His experimentation took its toll. He was up most of the night, most nights it seems, and his marriage ended in 1923. They grew apart, obviously, if she was living in the daytime and he was living at night. I don't know what he did for his work. So when the marriage finished, he went to live in Caterham, and there he took over his father's business. He was a contemporary of Guglielmo Marquews. Marquews is a very interesting man, fascinating man. An Italian, invented radio, went to the Italian government with his discovery. They laughed at him and told him it was a joke. So he came to England with it, and they immediately looked at it and said, "We want you." And the rest is history, because he carried on inventing, and he started the Marconi company. And he was a friend of Jerry. They were contemporaries. Marconi was the inventor who started the Marconi company, and Jerry was the experimenter who tested the equipment. There is I don't know whether you've heard this before, but there's rather an interesting, I'm hoping it's a...
Annual monument today.
Can you hear this?
Is recorded the test of the first major telegram to reach Australia direct from England as the result of those experiments. In a very much shorter time than it took to read it, that message had covered by approximately 12,000 miles or more in its travel from the homeland.
So that's actually Marconi's voice, and that's available on the RSGB website. Definitely worth listening to. This photograph you probably have seen before. It's the iconic photograph of Jerry with in his shack in the early days. A maze of equipment, loudspeakers, wires everywhere, wires around your feet, wires around your neck. The whole place was just hanging with wires, but it all worked. And this is where he lived. This is his transmitter, by the way. So G2NM, Caterham, 1 kilowatt transmitter, 2 valves with room for a third. Don't know what happened to that one. Vanished behind the wires, I think. And there's the house that he transmitted from, Coombe Dingle in Caterham in Surrey. I travelled out there quite a few years ago, and the building is still there. That mast, you can see that in the background, it's 100 feet. He had contractors in to install it. And there he is, just there, just in front of the door. The house today is now an old people's home. The gable is still there, and it's been built on at the right-hand side. There's a young girl there smiling. Please don't ask me any questions about that, because I should deny any knowledge of it. There's a plaque on the wall hidden by the undergrowth, and the plaque is clear here from this house during the year 1927. Gerald Marquez, G2NM, made the first broadcast of the British Empire. So he was an activist and involved in contributing towards the establishment internationally of the rules and frequencies that were eventually we were all allowed to use. And his experiments in the end led to him applying properly to the post office and getting permission for a broadcasting license with certain restrictions. He had a maximum power input of 1 kilowatt, and he had restrictions on when he could broadcast and what he could broadcast. So it's fairly tightly controlled, but quite a remarkable thing that to have a broadcasting license. He spent the total sum of £6,000 then. Now, I know someone here is going to do this, but if you go online and look at £6,000 then and what that's worth today, it's a phenomenal sum. So the corn business must have paid very well indeed. Then he had an invitation in 1924 from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, inviting him to a banquet. He was always getting invitations, but he could not make it. We don't know the reason why, but a friend sent him the menu. And the menu started with tropical fruit interference, thermocouples with assorted leaks, Neutrodyne soup with Didars, filament of sole, spaghetti alla Marconi, ham, roast, etc., down to cabinet pudding, cold plate, finishing off with heavy-side layer cake, CQ cheese, Litzendrath, static crackers with liquid Bakelite. Please leave all 5-watt and other bottles at home. The entertainment is QRM by Radio Orchestra. So his first major achievement was to make first radio contact with between Britain and California in 1927. And this card, which is on exhibit at the Amberley Museum, proves the date and the frequency I don't know whether this is legible to you. It was with 6ZAR CC Weisel in Los Gatos, California. He says, I certainly hope our logs check on this reception as it establishes a record for both of us. And then goes on to say when he's on the air from 0200 to 0700 at GMT on Friday night, and then a bit about his transmitter. Now today, this is what is on that site. The house has been knocked down and a new one has been built. I've worked quite closely with the library at Los Gatos, and they've been very helpful indeed in locating the exact place where the contact was made from. And the library has a permanent display of this first radio contact with much of the material that I've supplied for them. Moving on, I'm going to just stop sharing for a minute. Okay. Now, in 1924, he was appointed ARRL operations manager for the British Isles. And in that year, just slightly afterwards, he was the first to contact New Zealand using speech. In 1925, he contacted a radio officer of an American warship, the USS Seattle, which was in New Zealand waters. The radio officer thought it was quite remarkable and went to speak to his captain. The captain said, "This is a load of rubbish. I just don't believe you." So he devised a set of questions with answers that only he knew, and he sent them to the American embassy, telegraphed them in London, so that only he and the diplomat knew the questions and answers. And the next day, the diplomat went to Jerry's house. Contact was re-established with the ship, and the questions were asked and the correct answers were given, which proved that it wasn't just make-believe. It's hard to imagine that things were so unbelievably impossible then for anyone to believe it, but there we are. He was the first to make radio contact using CW between Britain and South America. Now, if you can imagine this scenario, it's a freezing cold January night, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. You're chatting to an American operator somewhere in one of the southern states. Your wife and a partner is sitting next to you, bringing you cups of coffee and biscuits, as I'm sure she does or he does. And then you switch off, that signal is finished, the last contact made, and then you hear a very faint signal calling you. Well, that's exactly the situation that Jerry was involved in. And he was actually communicating with a radio operator from the United States, who was actually on the Rice-Hamilton expedition in 1925. And actually, I should have said Hamilton Rice. The Americans call him Ham Rice. He was a great explorer, incredible guy. He spent a lot of time in the Amazon, exploring the source of the Amazon, mapped out a lot of it. And this particular expedition was recorded in the Royal Geographical Journal, the RGS Journal, in June 1926, because they were the sponsors. Now, I managed to buy a copy on eBay. It's the only one available. I noticed yesterday there is another one available, but there's a whole series of them, and you've got to spend something like £1,200 to buy that particular edition. So this was Ham Rice's 6th expedition in his quest to locate the source of the Amazon. And there was also another question he had to answer, and that was the existence of a white Indian group of natives living in the wild. I'm going to go back to sharing and picture. Okay, I've got to open this up again. Sorry about this delay. Here we are. With that?
Yeah, we can see that.
Great. So that's Ham Rice in his younger years, Dr. Hamilton Rice. And many years later, on this particular expedition, there he is in the field at the Rio Negro, somewhere in the Amazon. Now, the radio operation was about 1,000 miles west of the Atlantic. And I don't really realize this, but the Amazon is such a mighty river. If you're on the Atlantic, on the edge of the Amazon, you're looking across, there's a distance of 200 miles. You cannot see the other side. It's so vast. And you have to travel hundreds of miles inland to actually see the other side. This picture shows the Boa Vista station, the radio operator, there's the operating tent. The RGS in London spent a lot of money sponsoring them, and then 6 months passed by before they heard anything. So they thought the expedition was lost, because in that area of Brazil, there were headhunters, cannibals, pernicious insects, snakes, and whatever else. Rice and his party had flown part of the way, but unfortunately the aircraft broke down. They had to trek west up the Amazon to reach Boa Vista by boat and by foot. And the RGS had actually given up until this contact was made by Jerry G2NM. So he managed to contact them. He spoke to them and got quite excited about it, phoned the RGS and said, we're going to meet again tomorrow night. And they came up and witnessed where the actual expedition was and heard the voice of Hamilton Rice and Swanson, the radio operator. So there's Swanson receiving. And there's the equipment as it was then. So this equipment was eventually taken back to London, and Jerry went up to the RGS by their request and built a cabinet, installed it all exactly as it was here. But unfortunately, over the years, it was taken apart, cannibalized, and very few pieces left. So it was a bit of a disaster, really. But what is left is now on a tray at the Royal Geographical Society. I've spent a couple of days there, and that's what it looks like. Right, moving on. This is a copy of Jerry's logbook from 1930, showing the sort of broadcasts he was making from his home. In October the 5th, 1930, he was away with his caravan shooting. And then he gives a special program here from 11:30 to 1 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, a relay from London with the records he played. And his Old Man River, down on the something or other, and end of transmission at 1 a.m. Good night. 1931, he married Irina, and that was a very good marriage. And they had a son, David. David and his wife, Liz, are currently living in Stratford. David, as I said, has been very supportive indeed, and the family have been very helpful with all kinds of pictures and snippets and things. David remembers the early days of the later days of his father's work, because Jerry would take the family everywhere, all over the country, not just shooting and sailing, but mobile operations. Later on, so actually earlier than that, Jerry was made president of the RSGB in 1929. And later he was made an honorary member. And then we're building up now just before the Second World War, when he assisted in the formation of the Civilian Wireless Reserve in 1937. Now, this is a true story, which David told me. He was at home in Caterham one evening, and two men in suits came to visit him and said, "You're Gerald Marcuse?" "Yes." "May we come in?" And they produced their credentials from one of the Ministry of Intelligence agencies. And they said, "You're moving to Bosham, south of Chichester. And we can't tell you any more." And that's what happened. He moved to Bosham, later joined by Irina, and he was granted a restricted certificate in radio telephony, which entitled him to operate on board a ship. And he became a member of the Civilian Wireless Reserve. So he was out on the Solent every day, and I don't know whether it was night as well, there's no record of it, monitoring German military traffic from this so-called motorized fishing vessel, an MFV, which was actually a Navy vessel in disguise. So he recorded in German the transmissions. These were all taken back to port. The car would take them to St Albans, Hertfordshire, and then they were sent to this place, which you probably recognize is Bletchley Park, where the National Ham Radio Museum is. Just a little bit of background about this picture. They're very fussy indeed, quite rightly, about photographs that you can use and cannot use. You have to get permission. I took this photograph on a lovely day, sent it to them for permission to use it, and they said no. We don't like the fact that there's a signpost in the window, which isn't there now, and there was a signpost there outside. The signpost was actually pointed to a bookshop. And they said, what we'll do is we'll take our own picture tomorrow and we'll send that to you and you can use that. Well, the next day was a horrible day, cloudy, dull, raining. So they decided to use my picture and airbrushed out the bookshop sign and sent the picture back to me, airbrushed out, and said, you can now use your picture. So that was that. So he went through the war involved in this monitoring. And then in 1945, he was awarded a certificate of valued and devoted service to the Radio Security Service, the RSS. And he was listed as group leader in the RSS. And this letter is from the RSS confirming the honour and the service, signed by Sir Herbert Creedy, who was in charge of the department. And thanked for all his efforts that he did. I sent a copy of this letter to Bletchley Park several years ago, and as a result of it, they have placed Jerry on the honour roll, which is a very good thing, where he deserved to be. So now, later years, this is his shack in Bosham. So after the war, he decided to stay in Bosham. They both decided to stay, and the house was called Tidewaters. That was taken, I think, in the late 50s. This is the house in 1944, and you can see the aerials on the roof. The squiggly thing just there is actually a hair that got attached to the photograph, so that's nothing to do with the aerial, unless someone has a strange explanation. In 1960, Jerry was interviewed because he was getting on a bit in age about his reminiscences in early radio. The RSGB thought he was so important that they needed a record of his experience. And my book contains a full transcript of the 5 interviews that took place. It's 36 pages and fascinating reading. This is a typed version of the reminiscences as recorded by Ham Clark, H.A.M. Clark, in November 1960. And you can see the gist of it. Right at the beginning, Jerry's asked, it would be natural to start at the beginning. Yes, 1913, I started. Did you have a license then? I only applied for it. We didn't bother about licenses. And I never had a pre-war license like this fellow here. Did you contact him? Yes, etc. And it follows through, yes, and another fellow who had never had a license. So they didn't seem to bother with licenses until later on. Now, need to say that during his Empire broadcasts, he struggled to get permission from the BBC to rebroadcast their transmissions. The BBC were using much lower frequencies. And it's important to realise that amateurs were only given the shortwaves because the Post Office thought they were no good. Slightly misguided. The BBC threatened him with legal action if he used any more of their broadcasts, which nobody could hear. So he had to stop. So then he went to the Savoy Hotel in London and employed a full-time orchestra, full orchestra, not full-time, full orchestra, with all the recording equipment, and hired a post office line to his friend Percy Valentine's house, who then filtered it and got it cleaned up and then sent it to Jerry for rebroadcasting. So that's how he found his way around the BBC as well as the post office. Sadly, Jerry died in 1961. And he is buried in a cemetery in Bosham. I'll just pick this up, these last few pictures. There we go. Got it. So his gravestone is not a gravestone at all. It's a sundial. And the sundial is suitably labeled at the bottom, the glory of God and in memory of a loving husband and father. And on top, there is a sundial. And when you look on the top, this is what you see, rather a nice brass plate with the inscriptions on and directions to the various places he contacted, with a few words about him and about his achievements. The BBC, sorry, the RSGB decided to further honour him with a bench. And this bench is in position in the outside the graveyard, overlooking a little bit of the Solent. And on the bench, there's a plaque, once again, paying tribute to his broadcasting work. Over the years, that became quite dilapidated. The colour went and the whole bench started to collapse a bit. So funds were raised and the RSGB paid for the restoration. And in September 2019, there was a restoration dedication ceremony at which some reps from the RSGB attended. There's David Marcuse, Jerry's son, just here. His wife, Liz. I don't know who this idiot is on the end here, but he happens to be in it, but there we are. And it was a very nice occasion. And I was given the opportunity of talking to this group about Jerry's life and work. He has a field named after him called Marcuse Fields. It's not just a field now, it's actually a housing estate. And that is not named after him because of his radio work. One day in Bosham in the 1950s, there was a fire, and the house that caught fire was burnt to the ground because the fire tender had to come from Chichester, which was a long way. So Jerry campaigned and got the council to base a fire tender in Bosham. And he went to a farmer called Farmer Brown. I'm not making this up. And he had secured the use of Farmer Brown's barn, and the tender was kept in the barn and called out whenever there was a fire that needed putting out. So this field, Farmer Brown's field, is now a housing estate and now bears Jerry's name. There's his latest QSL card, from Spark to Television Old Timer 1913. He was very self-conscious about his hair falling out, and he always seemed to wear this hat when he was photographed. He felt more comfortable about it. Now, what I've actually done is I've digitized all the archives at the Ambley Museum. So if there was anything that happened at that library and everything was lost, I've got a complete set of files with the whole lot preserved in digital format. That's every single letter, hundreds of them, photographs, etc. So I said, the book is obtainable in black and white from Amazon. In the back of that book, you will notice there's an email address, marcuseg2nm@protonmail.com. And you can use that for ordering the book, the color version from me. And if you wanted a set of files, digital files, you're quite welcome to them. I have to charge for the USB stick and the postage. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of it. And many thanks for listening. And I hope nobody's fallen asleep. So there we are.
David, I don't think anyone could have fallen asleep through that. It was absolutely riveting description of this man. And as you rightly said at the start of your talk there, and you refer to that in your book, it's kind of quite astonishing that he's not, we talk about in amateur radio terms, G5RV, for example, everyone knows that because of the antenna, but very few people will have ever heard of G2NM until you started to delve into this and find information to display about him. So, that was really, really good. We'll open up to discussion really from the floor and any questions that anyone's got to put to David while we've got him here tonight. Who would like to go first? Yes, Roger.
Hi, David. Thanks for that. That was really interesting, as Nick says. I didn't know anything about this guy. It sounds like a really good character. I wonder, as soon as you know his son well, I wonder if his maybe not his first wife, maybe his second wife or his son ever showed a similar kind of interest in either the broadcast or the amateur radio fraternity, other than supporting they know him in his endeavours. I wonder if they pursue that interest as well.
No, there's been no follow-up. David and Liz had 2 daughters, no son, but neither of the daughters have actually taken up the mantle. The interviews conducted by the RSGB are actually on a spooled tape somewhere in his house. And that is actually the record of the live interview that took place, but I'm afraid none of the family followed it up. But David is a very interesting guy. He was an engineer himself, and he gave a talk at the presentation in 2019 with a few details about the family's involvement and struggle with Jerry and his passion about radio.
No, it sounds like I say, it sounds like a really interesting guy. And
Yeah.
if they weren't, maybe not in the amateur world, in the other broadcast world, because he was clearly interested in broadcast side of it more than, or as at least equally with just pure contacts.
I think there was furious competition between the amateurs either side of the English Channel in France, Germany, and Britain to try and make first contacts. And there were some very skillful French amateurs who were probably on par with Jerry in knowledge. But Jerry was an incredibly generous guy. Some of the letters he had from obscure places asking, can you please send me a valve? Can you please send me a coil? And Jerry would send it and hopefully get paid for it. But
yeah, as you said at the beginning somewhere, the amount of money he spent was phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah, in today's terms, that's a phenomenal amount of money.
It's unbelievable. The actual corn business was bombed and destroyed during the war, and I would imagine there would have been compensation paid. But I don't know whether it was £6,000 or what. I have no idea.
Well, Rachel worked it out at 472,000, so I think I'd be very happy to get that amount. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, David. That's really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else to put a question or make a comment to David? Edmund, M0MNG, are you still with us? Are you able to turn your microphone on and just tell the audience here and David what one of the call signs is that you hold? We can't. If you're trying to speak, Edmund, we've got no audio from you, unfortunately. Carry on fiddling your end, Edmund, and we'll pick you up in a minute. I do know I'm going to steal his thunder for him. He holds the license from Ofcom for G2NM because he volunteers at the Amberley Museum, and the Amberley Museum hold the call sign, and he is the holder of that call sign. So Edmund, I know, feels not so much the burden of it, but the amazing historical link of that. And I think we can all identify with that, can't we? You know, you're the holder of this person who genuinely was a pioneer both of broadcast radio and amateur radio, 100 years before we're now meeting here tonight.
I sent Ed a message asking him to turn on his audio, and he said he's not muted. So I sent a message back saying we cannot see or hear you. So
yeah,
obviously some problem there, but he can obviously hear us.
Yeah, that's a shame, Ed, that you're unable to participate. Two solutions obviously come to mind to anyone involved in radio and electronics. Reboot your computer and come back in again and see if your audio comes up. And in the meantime, quickly check the connection for your microphone attached to the radio. Okay, so he's taken that advice.
Yeah.
I hope Edmund does come up, because Edmund, by the way, as well, is one of the people involved in the ICQ podcast, and Martin Butler, who is the driving force behind that with his son Colin, sent me a note today just saying that he bought the book and just thought it was amazing, and really enjoyed the story. So it would be good, wouldn't it, to get the ICQ podcast to do something on this as well? I think they should.
He's come back.
And it says connecting to audio, so hopefully we'll get that this time. No, it's got a cross on it. Edmund, are you connected now, or no? You've got the audio for some reason isn't connecting.
It's ticked now. No.
Ah, right. You come up now. Try unmuting now. I'll send you a message asking. Right, can we hear you now, Ed?
I don't know, can you?
We can.
Wonderful. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Ed Spicer, Mike Zero, Mike November Golf, a relative newcomer to all things amateur radio. I only became licensed as recently as 2009. But Amberley Museum is about 12 miles by road away from here. And about 6 or 7 years ago, I became a volunteer there. And not that I turn up very often due to work commitments and health problems and things, but around about 2020 or so, I held a full license, and I was invited to take over looking after the licenses that we hold at Amberley Museum. Now, the main one is Golf Bravo 2 Charlie Papa Mike GB2 CPM for Chalk Pits Museum, which is our permanent special event station call sign. But there is also the call sign Golf 2 November Mike. Now, at some stage, and I don't know when or the whys or the wherefores exactly, but at some stage, G2NM was transformed from an individual license into a club license. And I do know that the now defunct Chichester Club held that call sign, certainly in the first decade of this millennium, but also I think in the 1990s and possibly earlier than that as well. So these days I hold G2NM on behalf of Amberley Museum, and I am very mindful of the heritage of that call sign and everything that was achieved with it many decades ago. So holding that call sign is not something I do lightly. The only time that we ever use it, though, on the air is on International Marconi Day. So if you want to get G2NM in your logbook, the Saturday in April towards the end of the month, nearest to Marconi's birthday, is the day to look out for it. And from our QTH with our doublet antenna on 40 meters, we quite often work German stations. I can speak some German after a fashion, and I certainly have had QSOs in German on International Marconi Day using that. And himself did speak German. I'm actually quite pleased about that little fact that I've just mentioned. So I think that's everything I can think of to add, but I will keep listening in case anybody wants to ask any questions or to make any comments. Back to you, Mr.
You've got
Chapman.
David with a question to you, Ed. Go on, David.
David, sorry, Ed, is there a guy called Jeff there in charge of the Radio Museum now?
Not anymore, I'm afraid. I think I know who you mean, and I've got a feeling that if I'm thinking of the same person, he may no longer be with us, possibly.
Right. May I ask who the archivist is? I was dealing with Claire Seymour.
Again, I don't know. In the last few years, there have been many changes in personnel
Right.
at Amberley Museum at a noticeably high pace, shall we say.
Right.
So even if I'd known who it was a couple of years ago, I wouldn't swear blind that it was still the same person today.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ed, I was just saying while we were waiting for your computer to boot up and try and get back in, and thank you for your contribution there. That I know you're involved with the ICQ podcast with Martin Butler and the others. Perhaps I ought to do it, but you could as well. I think we ought to suggest to Martin, if David's agreeable, for an interview with David about this G2NM story, because I think it would make a nice addition for the podcast, Ed.
Yes, absolutely. And I suspect that Martin himself would be sympathetic to that idea, because the last time I saw him face to face a couple of weekends ago, I forget the circumstances in which the subject came up, but Martin said that he had been reading about Gerald Marcuse and he was surprised, as has already been mentioned this evening, that given everything he achieved in his life, it's surprising and perhaps not altogether right that he's not better known amongst the amateur radio fraternity than he is. So I will, if you're agreeable, David, I will certainly contact Martin and put that suggestion forward.
May I speak?
David, yeah, go on, David.
Yes, I'd be very pleased to. One thing that is often missed is that Jerry was in a constant battle with the BBC, and Lord Reith, who was the Director General many years ago, and he didn't see eye to eye about things. BBC were extremely angry the fact that Jerry was getting all the kudos for his successes, and the BBC was getting nothing but complaints from Australia, New Zealand, all over the world, that people just couldn't hear them. And because of Marcuse's successes, there was discussion about an honour, that Jerry should have a national honour. And it is suspected that this was quietly, shall I say, trodden on, squashed by the BBC and the Post Office, because Jerry was a very realistic guy, experimenter, and he was not a company man, and he was not a conformist by any means. And it's probably because of that that he was never honoured by it. I mean, everybody has heard of Marconi. Nobody's ever heard of Marcuse, which I think is very sad. But there we are.
Absolutely. Well, the fact that he annoyed the powers that be is probably an indication that he was doing something right rather than doing something wrong.
Nothing has changed with the Post Office, has it? But I don't want to go into politics.
Has anyone else any questions or comments to David?
I have a comment. First of all, the Amberley Museum is one of the nicest museums that I've ever been in. And I've been there several times. And also, Ed, I guess you're aware that G5RV is also in West Sussex. It's held by the Mid-Sussex Amateur Radio Society in West Sussex.
ideas, and I've had the pleasure of working them in the last couple of years on 40 meters SSB.
We get on every morning on 21.350. In SSB on 21.350, the club gets on Monday through Friday. I have to get in my advertisements when I can. But we do get on every well, that would be your time. It's lunchtime net. So your time, it would be 9 and 4, 13:30. It's 9 o'clock in the morning here when I get on, but it's 13:30 in the afternoon, Monday through Friday. All are welcome. This morning, as a matter of fact, the signal jumped over New Jersey and went into Indiana this morning. But they did work an N8 in Indiana this morning. But they'll work anyone that they can hear, of course. And you're perfectly welcome to jump aboard as everyone else that's listening is. And that's my comment and my advertisement for the day.
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, I do love all these links to these amazing people in the history of our hobby. So, anyone else with any other comments or questions to David? Yeah, go on, Keith.
Yes, thanks for that fascinating talk, David. I've had the privilege of seeing the sundial twice because I used to live in Sussex. But I shall certainly buy the book now because the dial just didn't give him enough justice, in my view. Not enough information on there. So thank you for producing the book, and I'll be contacting you.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Keith. All right. Have we got anyone else? If not, can we first of all show our appreciation to David for a really, really interesting talk tonight? Thank you very much, David. That was very, very good.
Thank you.
A virtual clap.
It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to be with you all.
Yeah, it was a fabulous story, and I think you've got a number of people in this audience here tonight who want to try and help you get this story out and get more people to read the amazing amount of work that you put in. I mean, that's very clear when you look at your book, David, the amazing amount of work that went into the research to uncover all this information. It wasn't a 5-minute research on Google or something. You had to do this the old-fashioned way, tracking people down and tracking the family down and so on. And it was a worthwhile for anyone interested in radio and amateur radio, definitely a worthwhile thing to do, because I think the one thing that unites all of us in our interest in amateur radio is just this concept of broadcasting across the world, and listening to people from other countries. And in fact, our speaker last night, who was talking about their expedition to Flannan Isles, was saying that he got into radio listening, I think, discovering on shortwave radio, Australia broadcasting on the shortwaves, and listening to shortwave broadcasting got him interested in radio and what it was and how it worked, and then eventually into the path of amateur radio. So it's clear that what Jerry was doing back in the 1910s and 20s and 30s owes an awful lot to our hobby today, doesn't it? But thank you very much, David. Very, very much appreciated. And thank you very much for the work you did in preparing for the presentation and for coming along and giving the story.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, no, pleasure to meet you.
It's nice to meet everybody, East and West.
Yeah,
New Jersey to Cape Town.
We've got some of our club members missing tonight for all kinds of reasons, but some of them, we've got 2 regular members who always log on from Germany, but they told us yesterday they knew they weren't able to be here tonight, and to give their apologies, Mike and Adriana. And I know they're going to be waiting to have a look at the video of this so they can catch up on the story. And we've got some others in the same position. Our friend Tom who's actually one of our club members. He lived in England as well, but now lives in South Africa. ZS1AFS. He finds our meetings a little bit too late for him. He wants to go to bed because they're slightly ahead of us. So I know that he catches up by watching the videos as well. So we've got a number of people I know that are very keen on finding out more about this story. Congratulations and thank you for coming tonight. Okay, I'm just going to turn the recording off. And I'm also going to say good evening to our viewers on YouTube, and we'll stop the sharing on YouTube as well now. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, and hope you enjoyed it. Sorry, just before you go, I just looking over at the YouTube channel, there's a guy, Steve 66, and I'll just read out what he said. He just said, "Enjoyed listening, thank you. What's his radio spark? Where did his radio interest begin? Did Gerald know this gentleman and mention him?" I think he means you, David, not Gerald. "Artie heard the distress signal from the RMS Titanic in Wales." And he got from Wikipedia, Arthur Moore was a Welsh wireless pioneer who heard the distress signal from the Titanic on his homemade equipment. Subsequently worked for the Marconi Company, hoping to develop radio and sonar. Yeah, that's a story we've actually, to Steve, if you're still there listening to us or watching us on YouTube, the story of radio and the Titanic was covered by us a couple of years ago in the Radio Club, and we had a fantastic speaker from Canada, a Canadian radio ham who had researched the history of radio on the Titanic. So about the Marconi Company, but specifically about the radio equipment on the Titanic and what actually happened. And amazingly, for those of us that can remember who were in this call tonight, that speaker at the club a couple of years ago in the early days, just during the COVID lockdown days, actually, when he came to speak, he gave 2 presentations because the first one he gave went on for about an hour and 3/4, and he only got through halfway through the things he wants to say. So David, I think our Canadian friend, who I know was also writing a book about it as well, is as detailed as you in tracking down and looking for the real detail. And it's the real detail that made your story tonight, I would say to you, that makes it so clear and so interesting to us. So thank you. Thank you, Steve.
Say, at the age of 16, when Jerry was in Einbeck, the tasks he was given were so mundane, so boring, filing pieces of metal and making weights, that one comment came out in his diary: "I do not want to be an engineer." The diary is written in English, in part in German, and it's very, very difficult to transcribe it. But there is a copy at the Amberley Museum because I sent one to them a couple of years ago.
We've got a number of people who have come into radio, funny enough, through engineering, who became engineers and then discovered they discovered something to do with electronics, and that became their passion more than engineering. So I don't think he was alone in coming from that background, David. Anyway, thank you again. So I've just gonna, so thank you, Steve. I've just posted a comment in the comments on the YouTube channel. Thank you, Steve, for your comments there. And I'm going to stop the YouTube. So thank you very much. And thank you for staying with us, Steve.